Bandai Card Fest and Nationals is right around the corner, and the meta is honestly kind of up in the air. Everyone knows that Doflamingo is the best deck, but not everybody would consider it the best option. And it's been kind of hard to tell how the rest of the meta is going to form under Doflamingo. I've been doing a lot of testing personally and watching a lot of different people play, and I think I know where I rate the decks at the moment. So let's go ahead and get into it. Before we get into this video, yo, I'm using my last hours in Arizona to make this video. I'm packed up right now to go Orlando. So if you guys could please drop a like and subscribe, that would be greatly appreciated. Yo, I don't know, subscribe, I don't know. Let's get into it though. All right, there's a lot of decks to look at here. We're going to go up from S all the way down to F. Let's get into it. So first off, we're going to start off with the S tier. And for S tier, I'm going to have to put, where's the deck at? Yo, there's actually, why there's so many decks? I'm gonna have to put Doflamingo at the top. There it is. Yo, I don't know what's going on with my vision, but I have to put Doflamingo at the top. This deck is just way too powerful at a base level, and this deck has god hands that nobody can beat. This is what the deck looks like right now. This is a topping list from the recent booster box event, which was one of our only events before Nationals. And the Jinbei card is really what has set this deck over the edge. We're now able to call 2 units at once in the early game. And if we play this on back-to-back turns, it's just nuts. Like, we're just producing so many units at once, faster than any deck in the game, and it's very hard for decks to deal with. Even without chaining Jinbeis, this deck just happens to be very strong into most of the meta in general. Even at just seeing one Jinbei, we're still beating most of the decks. And this deck destroys Blackbeard, which Blackbeard really would have been the anti-meta deck. Like, I genuinely think if Dofi didn't exist, Blackbeard could potentially have just been BDIF. But Doflamingo exists, it destroys Blackbeard, and yeah, that's kind of put Blackbeard to the back burner, and Doflamingo is just a very strong deck. So Doflamingo is the main deck I'm going to put in S tier. I think it's the only deck that is like as strong as it is right now. Of course, there's other decks that are capable of winning tournaments and stuff like that. I just think this is the only S level deck at the moment. So next up, we're going to go to A+ tier, and this might be controversial, so bear with me for a second because I'm going to go over it, but I'm going to put Lucci as the second best deck. So I think for some people, this may be controversial. For other people, it'll probably make a lot of sense. I really do think this is the second strongest deck in the game right now. This is a top 32 list from the booster box event. I already made a Lucci video, so I won't talk too much, but this list definitely isn't my favorite, but I do think it's a fairly solid list, and I think the Uta idea isn't actually the worst. But anyways, in my Patreon article, I talk about Lucci being a fundamentally broken deck, and I really do think it is. The game plan of play our units and kill yours is literally as broken as it sounds. We can hypothetically beat any deck in the game except decks that call too many units or decks that can't have their units destroyed. So if Doflamingo's chaining back-to-back Jinbeis, it might be a little difficult to come back. And then Blackbeard, Luffy, and Teach with both kind of stop us from destroying their units can be difficult matchups as well. But there's still game plans and techs to deal with both of these decks. I really do think it's the second best deck right now. I think it's more gatekeepy and oppressive than pretty much any other deck on this list. Like, it's on like Doflamingo levels of gatekeepiness, in my opinion. Next up, for A+, we have Shanks. So this is another one that might be kind of controversial. This is probably the one that I'm like least confident in my opinion about. I know it's definitely an A+ tier. I'm just not sure where I would rank it. So I just have it here just based on what I've heard from other people. I haven't personally tested this deck too much, but from what I understand, it is the 50-50 deck of the game. This is Mangley's first place Shanks list. Similar to Lucci, it also has abilities to beat any deck on this list. As I mentioned, it's like the 50-50 deck. The biggest appeal is that you potentially have a chance no matter what you're playing against. But the difference from this and Lucci, what I would say is that Lucci is favored where it's favored, which is pretty much against everything, and then it's unfavored where it's not. Where, you know, Lucci has those few decks like Black, Yellow, Luffy, and Teach that are just very, very hard to beat. But Shanks is a lot closer to 50-50s across the board. But the reason that I would put Lucci above Shanks is because I do think Shanks is a little sketchy to Lucci and Doflamingo. Even if you want to say it's 50-50, I personally think it's a bad 50-50, but I know I've talked to very good Shanks players that seem like they're fairly confident into what they can do in the Dofi and Lucci matchup, so I'm hoping to get proven wrong at Nats. If it is the case where there's Shanks at Nats that are like consistently beating Dofi and Lucci, then I do think I would have to even potentially put Shanks above Lucci, because Shanks also has a much better BY matchup. I think it's arguably even favored into BY compared to Lucci, which is bad against that matchup. And Shanks should also have a better time against Blackbeard than Lucci, from what I understand as well. So I think that would definitely put Shanks on top if that is true, but we'll have to wait for Nats to see. But that's definitely my biggest concern with this deck, just like the Lucci and the Dofi matchup. But outside of the Luffy and Dofi matchup, I do think it's pretty strong across the board. I understand that you're capable of beating like both Pluffy and Blackbeard. If Pluffy goes first, it might get a little weird, but I understand you're still capable of it. You should be advantageous into BY Luffy and Bonnie, and then Dofi and Lucci's where we're, kind of wondering. But anyways, next up we have Pluffy. And Pluffy's position is, I think I would never call Pluffy the second best deck, but I think its position could be interchangeable with one of these. Like, I think I would call either one of these the second best deck at the moment. It might change after whatever happens on that. So at the moment, I think I would call one of these the second best deck, and then I would put Pluffy like in third. I think there's potential for that. But anyways, this is another aggro deck, so naturally it's also going to be like pretty solid into Teach as well. It also cooks BY Luffy, which we'll talk about BY Luffy later, and it's just a fan favorite in general. This is a top 16 Pluffy list from the booster box event, and this deck is supposed to be able to beat anything when it goes first. So it kind of has a similar idea to Shanks, right? Whereas like Shanks is kind of like 50-50 into everything. Pluffy's like, if you win the Daro, you can probably just win, which is pretty impressive, right? But just like my concern with Shanks, I am concerned about this deck's performance into Lucci and Dofi. I understand that you can very much beat Lucci and Dofi when you go first. It's even possible to kind of beat them when going second. But I know that these matchups are quite difficult. But to be fair, the demands for Lucci to beat Pluffy, especially when going second, is a little high. Like, if Lucci's not seeing their ice ages and stuff, Pluffy's board might just get out of hand and they might lose to Pluffy. Similar to Dofi, if Dofi isn't drawing enough Jinbeis off curve, they might just get cooked by Pluffy. And if Doflamingo just doesn't draw Jinbeis in the first place, they'll probably just get outvalued by Pluffy anyways. The new Gum Gum Giant card that discards a card to draw 2 while giving plus 4k defense is just too strong. And if you high roll on that, like, it's ridiculous. Like, the deck is definitely pretty insane. So I would definitely rank this like this high. Next up, we have BY Luffy. So I would put BY Luffy a little under these. Depending on how the meta goes, BY Luffy could potentially rise up just depending on popularity. I think my expected popularity, so keep in mind while I'm making this tier list, I didn't really talk about this, but I have a level of expected popularity in my mind, which I think Doflamingo is going to be extremely popular. I think Pluffy is definitely going to be extremely popular. I think Shanks is going to be popular too. And Lucci I thought was going to be unpopular, but I've heard more and more people talking about it recently. It seems like now that people know that Teach is down and not many people are on BY Luffy, people recognize that Lucci is a very strong pick. So I expect all these decks to be popular. But based on Shanks and Pluffy's popularity, I have to drop BY Luffy a little lower just to right here. So BY Luffy is a deck that beats like the best decks in the game right now, which I consider to be Lucci and Dofi. But you are kind of rough like against everything else. Like, the matchup against Shanks is a bit rough. The matchup against Pluffy is actually just like, is very miserable. Your matchup against Teach is very miserable. Your matchup against Bonnie is very, very rough as well. Then there's like, other random decks like Foxy and stuff that might be quite decent into BY. But those decks don't really matter. The point is that you beat the 2 best decks, but you're a bit weird into all the other relevant decks in the meta. I think BY Luffy is a really high risk, high reward pick going into the Nationals meta, and it's probably going to be that way for this whole meta for now. I think the only way where BY would like definitively like just go up here again is if the meta just ends up being like just only Lucci, only Dofi, then you only have a few Shanks and Pluffys here and there. But that's not what it's shaping up to be. It seems like people are huge fans of Pluffy, even though I have my concern against these 2 matchups. Pluffy's still an extremely popular deck, and as I said, if Pluffy goes first, it is insane. So that just puts BY in a weird position right now. And I think that basically sums up BY's position in the meta right now. It's a fairly solid deck. I should have already popped up the list here so y'all can see that. Let's go on to the next deck. So next up we have Teach. After Teach, there's one more deck I'm going to mention, the A+, and I couldn't decide whether to put Teach last or Bonnie last. So I know some people might get mad at me putting Teach this low. I started off the meta. I put Teach here. I put it as the other deck in S. Then I moved it here, and these decks were like arranged a little bit differently. But now I've moved it all the way down here. It seems that Teach, like when Teach finally won in Japan and people started really playing it, it seemed like that was just its time to shine. Because after that, it seemed everybody knew what they were doing against Teach. People are aware that if you have a 1-drop in your hand, you should just drop the 1-drop. That way you have extra attackers against Teach in the late game. Dofi players really figured out the matchup. Like, now they can't, like, if Dofi opens 2 1-drops, they basically just win the game on the spot. Or if they have Teach is also just an insane card. in this matchup, because even though you turn off their Jinbei from like their 5-down turn and 6-down turn and onwards, they can call 2 units per turn. They're swinging for 7Ks and stuff. Like, it's just too rough in the meta right now. So like, even though you potentially beat like BY, you can potentially beat all of these decks. Like Pluffy, I think Pluffy's a bit closer, but I've heard Teach players some of they can beat Pluffy. So even though you can technically beat like Lucci, Shanks, Pluffy, BY, and Bonnie as well, you lose to the best deck in the game, Doflamingo, which is probably expected to be the most popular deck going into nationals. And the other issue is that like Shanks and Pluffy, for example, are very capable of beating Teach. Even if you think Teach is generally favored, if you win the dice roll, what happens if you lose a dice roll, right? So you're basically losing to every single Dofi you come across, and then you might lose to some Shanks and some Pluffy. So that puts it in a very awkward position to really take to a tournament like nationals. Depending on how the meta shapes out, or if my read is wrong, Teach could definitely move up, but for the time being, I think I definitely do have it towards the bottom of A+. I think we'll have to wait for more support next set. Then lastly, we have Bonnie. So let me pull Bonnie up here. And this is another one that's a bit up to debate. I couldn't decide whether to rate it above Teach, and I actually couldn't decide if it should even been in this tier in the first place. So this is Bonnie right here. This is a second place Bonnie list from the Booster Box Treasure Cup, and Bonnie is interesting because it's favored into Doflamingo, Pluffy, and BY Luffy, but it's unfavored against Shanks, Teach, and Lucci. So as I mentioned earlier, I do expect like quite some popularity between like Shanks and Lucci, not so much Teach. But if there's anything I learned, especially from the time when I was coping on like Rebecca and stuff like that, having Lucci as a bad matchup is like one of the worst things possible, because Lucci always has an immense amount of popularity. I thought this was going to be the first time where Lucci was maybe not going to be popular, but it seems like a lot of people are hopping back on the Lucci train. So it seems like once again, it's expected to be very popular. And Shanks is also a very popular deck right now. It literally just won like one of the only big tournaments we had prior to nationals. So having two of the most popular decks as a bad matchup is really rough. Even if you are beating the most popular deck, Doflamingo, Doflamingo players actually believe that they have pretty decent odds against Bonnie. From the Doflamingo players I've talked to, like the really good ones I've talked to, they said that if they can like Grav Blade like the Cavendish and the Carrot, and then if they can just jam into ACOS Kid by playing like a bounce on, just jamming into the Kid, they think they can win. Even when I was in Canada playing Pokemon a few weeks ago, I played against Bonnie at locals, and you know, obviously it's just locals, right? But I played against Bonnie at locals, and I smoked them pretty bad too. So if you're losing to two of the most popular decks, and you're not even beating Dofi 100% of the time, that might be rough. And when I say Lucci's popular, like it's really popular. Like, Lucci, I feel like Lucci's just such a bad matchup to have in general, in my opinion. Unless it's like close. If it's like a close bad matchup, then I think it's fine. But I don't think Bonnie versus a good Lucci is that close. Like if you're playing against like random Lucci's, maybe I could definitely see Bonnie winning. But like if you're going against like, you know, like my boy Clayton Hill, for example, or you're going against Kyle Henriksen, who's also from Arizona. Like, I don't know if they're losing to Bonnie. You feel me? Maybe I'm glazing. I don't know if they're losing to Bonnie though. But that's it for the A+ tier. Let's go ahead and briefly go over the rest of the tier list. So for the top of A, I have Anel. Anel's just in a weird position right now. Anel is very capable of beating Dofi, but from what I understand, it is a bit rough into a lot of these other decks, including Lucci, which, as I said, I think having Lucci as like a proper bad matchup is really rough. And then losing to Pluffy, which also seems to have an immense amount of popularity, seems quite rough too. I know you also lose to Teach. Bonnie versus Anel, I've never heard the consensus on this. Like, I feel like if I ask Russell Lepar which one wins between these two, like, he's going to say Bonnie. But then, like, if I ask Jonas, he might, I don't know. Jonas be BSing sometimes. But I feel like Jonas might say Anel wins, so it's kind of up to debate. But, like that, this is, like, an uncertain matchup right here. Like, it's, I don't know. I think his position is just kind of rough right now. I think we need, more support next set before it can move up to A+. I don't think people are really even looking into Anel like that right now. Next up, we have Smoker. Anel's just been a more highly rated deck in the past, which is why I have it at the top of it. But I think Smoker's pretty good too. I think Smoker's basically just a weaker Lucci that has better odds into BY and Teach. But I don't think that means much in the meta right now because BY and Teach aren't very popular in the first place. And I do think your Dopey matchup gets a lot more sketchy. Your Pluffy matchup probably gets a lot more sketchy. We should probably still be able to beat Shanks and Bonnie. But I think at the Booster Box tournament, there was actually a Smoker who was X1. But I think they lost to Bonnie while they're X1, which is kind of concerning. So maybe Smoker also happens to be weaker into Bonnie than Lucci as well, which is also kind of a concern. But I do think the deck is pretty solid. Probably just needs more testing to figure out the list and stuff. Next up we have Foxy. Foxy's just like a decent meta call right now. People are gonna say I'm coping, so I'm not gonna talk too much. I'm not really gonna gas it up. I just know that you're capable of beating Doflamingo, which is, you know, very, very nice. Being able to beat the best deck in the format is quite nice. But at that point, I probably would just play Bonnie. But the thing is Foxy got popularized by this by a Foxy player in Japan, and they were capable of beating like Dofi and Teach, which were like the two best decks at the time. So it was a really good meta call, and you were able to beat BY too. So you'd be able to beat random BYs that were teching for this. But this has a really bad matchup into Shanks and Bonnie, and I believe Pluffy's a bit unfavored. Then Lucci's supposed to be a 50-50, but if the Lucci player is competent, or if you're playing like NA Lucci list, we probably do just beat Foxy because we just play more stuff that I think could deal with Foxy's engine and stuff like that. But a pretty decent deck. I think it's worth putting it in A. Lastly, we have Purple Black Luffy. This could honestly go in either like top of B or A. I actually don't have too much experience with this deck. I've just heard that it's like pretty decent. That's pretty much it. Like I know that its numbers are a bit awkward for Lucci to deal with because everything is higher cost. But for the most part, I'm not sure if you're like that good into Dofi. I'm not sure how good you are into BY. Like I think it's an alright deck. It might be better than I'm giving it credit for. If you guys have been doing really good with Purple Black Luffy, please let me know in the comments below so I know if I'm tripping. But I'm just putting it at the bottom of A because I know it's like a deck that's like close in power to these other decks, but I don't think it has like I don't think it's particularly spectacular in the current meta. Then for B tier, we have Moria. So the only reason I mentioned Moria actually, because whenever like Lucci is this dominant in the meta, let me just delete this. Whenever Lucci is this dominant in the meta, I normally just disregard talking about Moria because it breaks my heart. For those of you guys who don't know, I used to be like a Moria main before switching to Sakazuki. I was doing pretty well with that. But I put it here because like it's basically just like weaker Lucci. Like it's like more an aggressive version of Lucci. I think the main reason that some people play more in Japan is because they believe you're able to beat Lucci with it, but I don't think that's even true. I think if Lucci draws Morias, they just beat Moria anyway. So there's not too much to say about this deck. I think once again it's just like a weaker Lucci, weaker Smoker. Like black is black, so you can potentially beat like a lot of random decks like Bonnie or like a Nell and stuff like that. But I don't know, for the most part, I don't rate it too highly. Nami's similar to Teach, where you lose to the best deck in the format right now, but you technically are good into a lot of the control decks. Like you should be pretty good into like Lucci. You're supposed to lose to Teach too, actually. But I heard that's propaganda, but I'm pretty sure you're supposed to lose to Teach as well. But you should be able to beat like Lucci, potentially Bonnie. I think you'd also lose to Pluffy too. I don't know. I think it's a rough meta for Nami right now, losing to both Dofi and Pluffy. And then if there's random Teach ways, you lose to Teach. So I just think it's not like best meta for it right now. And then lastly, Katakuri. I talked about Katakuri the other day where I said it like kind of got buffed this format. Katakuri is just one of those decks where like if you sack, you can kind of just win, which is nice, but I think it's definitely not a reliable meta call. I still think it's strong enough to be called as B tier. I would just honestly never play it in a tournament. And then lastly for the tier list, or actually, you know what? My bad. Let me mention one more deck. If I mention Katakuri, then I probably should mention Purple Yellow Nico Robin. So this is a deck that's actually pretty decent. Honestly, do I want to even put this above Moria? I don't know, because this deck isn't that crazy. But it's just kind of like, it's just like a frustrating deck. Like if it triggers well, it can get very annoying. And the banish is very annoying as well because your opponent's just losing resources the whole game. I don't think this deck is very real. I think it would probably lose to like the majority of decks in like A+ and stuff like that. But I know I have seen it get wins here and there. It's a deck I need to do more research on, but based on what I've seen from it and just random results, I'm pretty sure it is a B tier level deck. So I definitely put it somewhere here. Let me not trip. I'm not calling it as good as Moria, but I'm playing Purple. I'm playing Nico Robin before Nami personally. That's just one shit. I'm playing Katakuri before Nami personally as well. But anyways, lastly, promos aren't in English yet. Buggy. So unfortunately, Buggy is missing promos that its promos would allow it to actually cook Doflamingo. So I think if we had those promos, Buggy would be very interesting. It might be like an A+ level deck or like the top of it or whatever. But the promos aren't in English yet, so there's not really too much to speak on this deck right now. But that's it for the tier list. Let's go ahead and talk. This is it for my tier list leading into nationals. I know that there might be like some controversial opinion and takes. Obviously, people are never gonna 100% agree on a tier list. But if there's anything you greatly disagreed with, or even minor, please just let me know in the comments. Always hoping to hearing other opinions and stuff that can maybe help change my mind. And if you guys have any like better list for reference, or you guys have something like you have some secret sauce you're really excited about, please tell me about that as well. Don't forget to like and subscribe if this was helpful. And with that being said, I'll catch you on the next one. Peace.